I've been enjoying preparing for this and going through it and getting ready for it. And every week I kind of like, I don't know, I kind of like to have a little bit of a hook, what gets us started. And I just got to thinking about this. When you think of the word marriage, what do you picture in your mind? You know, if somebody just says that, marriage, what do you picture? And I know for some people, they probably picture, oh, you know, there's that romance love thing. And that's what it is. Ooh, you know, marriage. Here's somebody's getting married. No, they're in love. And it's that nice, wonderful picture like that. And then there are probably people that actually, you know, think of the actual wedding ceremony and on the beach. And I've done a couple of weddings like that. And I love that. I love the sign in the bottom right. It says, 2 less fish in the sea. That's just kind of cute Florida wedding going on there. Or maybe that's what you think of, or maybe you're thinking of the wedding night and the honeymoon and things like that. People might think of that. Others might just think of the ongoing dating, courtship type relationship that's accompanied with marriage. Others may think, well, no, marriage is about building a family, getting a home, you're building a life together. That's marriage. For some people, marriage might be, yeah, we're under the same roof, but we're kind of like doing our own thing. You know, he's watching football and I'm on, you know, whatever the case might be. Some of you are snickering and it goes on. What do you picture when you picture marriage? What comes to mind? So we probably all have all sorts of different ones that are in there. Mine and my wife has changed a lot over the course of years. I would probably say that there have been different times in our life where a number of those would have been reflective of how we viewed marriage and what we thought of it, what we thought it was like. But I don't know, it was probably in somewhere around maybe our 10th year of marriage that it changed. And this became how we would view marriage from then on. There it is. That's our picture of marriage. Chasing the oneness. And we use that term, we talk about it in a lot of different ways, and I kind of want to unpack that today, and it will have impact whether you are married for a short period of time, you've been married for a long period of time, you're married again, or it has impact, believe it or not, whether you're not married, you're in a courtship phase, you're in a dating phase, you're single again. We're going to talk about how God has wired us for this relationship thing to take place. What does this chasing the oneness look like in our life? And that's where we're going to go. So this goes back to the Genesis passage, which has been so significant and so important for us. This is kind of the key verse in this whole Back to Eden series. It comes in Genesis chapter 2, where God has been sharing what the second view of creation with a great focus on man and woman and how we're being created. It says this after Adam has finally seen Eve, he's wowed by her, he breaks out into poetry. He says that, and then there is this pronouncement, and Jesus quotes it word for word in Matthew. And that's why. How we were created, that's why. A man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. Last week I shared a very interesting thing, that word united. Does anybody remember what that word in Hebrew is? Glue. We're just kind of glued together, literally glued together, joined together. So the idea of truly becoming one flesh. So today I want to talk about the significance of, if indeed we're created in the garden a specific way, how we are created, and what is it that we're chasing? What is it that leads to these deep relationships? And I'm going to give you some tools along the way, some things that, well, actually can help. So I'm going to talk about intimacy a lot today. I'm going to talk about intimacy, and the first thing I want to talk about, well, I want to talk about when we chase this oneness, how we're going about it, and we do it through the chasing of intimacy. And the first area of intimacy that we talk about is emotional intimacy. Now, it is intriguing when you read like divorce statistics. You read not just how many people get divorced, but what a couple who is getting a divorce says is the reason they're getting a divorce. the reason they say it failed, the reason it fell apart. There's all sorts of things that they end up sharing. They end up sharing statements like this, which I find very profound. These are common statements that the wife shares in a divorce setting with like her divorce lawyer, or they're going to counseling, or they finally decide it's over. But these are the type of things that come up. They say things like this: my husband's no longer my friend. The only time he pays attention to me is when he wants sex. He's never there for me emotionally when I need him the most. I feel alone and abandoned. We're like ships passing in the night. My husband has become a stranger to me, and I don't even know who he is anymore. I find that interesting because there was a period of time for all those couples when, I've done lots of premarital counseling, and, couples that are going to marry, and they're just, oh, he's wonderful. We're so close. We do everything together, and you just hear it, and it's good. But somehow it gets lost. It gets lost. And I believe it gets lost because we assume that after the rings are put on, that the chase for emotional intimacy is over with. But it's not. I believe that this chase for emotional intimacy is what we're supposed to be seeking. Now, writers of the New Testament understood it. They even pointed out in a couple of different places. Peter, who is the only apostle that we are sure was married. This is the only one that we know for a fact is married. We know that because his, mother, we know because of a gospel situation it gets mentioned. So 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7, it says this: in the same way, you husbands must give honor to your wives. I love that statement. Give honor to your wives. Treat your wife with understanding as you live together. Now, the word treat with understanding is significant because that's an emotional issue, to be treated with understanding. It's an emotional connection. Peter's writing this and he's saying, now husbands, you got to get this emotional thing right. This connecting with that spouse, that connecting with that person that you're dating, that connecting with the person that you're seeing, that relationship you want to have, because there is this emotional connection that you were wired for. He goes on to say, now, yeah, she might be weaker than you are, but she's your equal partner. I love that statement. Equal partner in God's gift of new life. Treat her as you should, because otherwise you are prepared. Your relationship with God gets hindered. That's the New Living Translation. I love it. It's a great translation by Tyndale, but I loved how it translated that verse, did a really excellent statement, that idea of giving honor, understanding as you live together. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25, Paul's writing now, Paul who wasn't married, Paul who really didn't understand, didn't have that experience, but he's got churches that are asking him this marriage thing. Some of us don't do well at it, so what does he end up saying? He ends up, husbands, love your wives, and then he just lays, he sets the bar really low. Husbands, love her like Christ has loved his church. Wow. Talk about the bar. He's just raised it as high as it can possibly be. So there's a significance to this emotional side of the relationship that we're supposed to get. We're supposed to understand it. One of the things that I do with, any couple that we've had in premarital counseling, any couple that we have ever done marital counseling with, at some point along the way, we talk about how we love each other in what languages that we're using. And Cheryl, you use French. I'm going to use Spanish. You ready? Yo te amo. No, yo te amo. Yo te amo. Je t'adore. Alfonso, what was I saying? What were you saying? Yeah, what was I saying? I love you. Anybody speak French? What was she yelling back at me? I love you, but I don't speak French. She doesn't speak Spanish. But we were communicating love, but because there was a language issue, it wasn't coming across. It's one of the reasons that Christian counseling now for years has dwelt on the fact that at some point we have to understand that how we are wired to hear and speak certain languages of love. And I'm not going to preach a language of love series. I'm just going to do it right now and just tell you that we've got to get this right, because when it's wrong, You can be in a relationship where you don't feel loved. Now, Gary Smalley said that there are 5 languages of love. He said that the most prominent ones was the language of touch. I love that. I love to sit close to my wife. I love to hold hands. We hug each other. It's the only thing I have against our king-size bed. It's hard to find her. It's just, it is, but that touch language is a big part of it. And I love it when my wife wants a hug or I hug her. It's that great moment. Other people speak a language of service. Tim, who I mentioned earlier, is a friend. Tim speaks an act of love to the entire community with service. And the reason he was helping to park cars on his second day at church was because that was his natural language of love. People were reaching out to him in love, and so he reached back with a language that he could speak. He spoke language of service. Some people speak the language of words. This is my other major language. I learned to speak it when I was a kid. I speak it now. Cheryl's probably not lived a day in her life where I was in country and she didn't hear me speak the words. Probably a multitude of times. Not a multitude in a single day, but she's heard it that often. Now, that and touch were my primary languages of love. My dad did not speak that language. My dad spoke a language of service or provision, despite all the issues they had, despite the stuff that was in his life, despite the struggles that he had. I don't have any memories of my dad not having at least a job and a side job, and then also garnering multitude of acres, so that the entire clan that lived together, aunts, uncles, cousins, all of us grandparents, there was food for everybody, and that was the thing that my dad did. But he didn't speak words. He didn't speak touch. And I remember being 18 years old and in the airport wondering where my dad was. I'm about to get on a plane to go to boot camp. It's the day after graduation. I go looking for my dad, and he's in the restroom, and he's crying. And he looked at me. For the first time in my life, I heard my dad speak these words. I love you, son. Prior to that time, I doubted whether my dad loved me because I didn't speak service, which he spoke, and he didn't speak words or touch. You see, when there's a language problem, we could easily end up not feeling loved. You have some individuals who speak a language of time. It's quality time. Just spend time with me. Just spend time with me. And there are individuals who are in marriages where, like the wife, just spend some time with me. He says, well, we're together. I just want to fix this over here. Or I need to take care of this over here. We're together. We're in the same room. And she's crying out, no, I just want time with you. Others speak the language of gifts. This is one that my mother spoke. And it's just surprise gifts, surprise things all the time. They just show up and they speak. None of these languages are bad and none of them are wrong, but everyone's wired a different way. Now, it's great to know what you speak. That's a great thing, knowing what you speak. But here's a Pastor Bruce quote. This is me. Remember where Peter said, honor your wife with understanding? The greatest act of honor you will ever show your spouse is speaking their languages of love. Man, if your wife speaks service, you better learn to speak it. If your husband speaks time, you got to learn to speak it. Because you will never feel more loved than when your spouse speaks your primary language. Now, if you're married and you got kids, that goes with your kids. Don't assume that your kids speak your language. They will never feel more loved by you as when you speak their language. If you want to establish emotional intimacy, you have to learn to speak the language of love. If you're single and you're dating, you're single again, and you're wondering, and a new relationship is coming to your life, one of the most important, significant things you do if there's going to be potential in that relationship is you learn the language of love. Actually, you know, when a guy, when he's young, he just tries them all because he doesn't know what's going to work. That's what it was like when you were young. You know, so, okay, give a gift. That didn't work. Let's do that, you know, because you're like shooting in the dark. I want to tell you, we shouldn't shoot in the dark. I think it's something to be discovered. And when we do it well, we automatically nurture the relationship and it becomes more. So when we talk about chasing emotional intimacy, I want my wife to have distinct memories of when I'm speaking her language of love. And I want to have distinct memories of when my wife is speaking my language of love. And the more that happens, the more emotional intimacy occurs in our relationship. It's part of what we do. So that's the first half that I want to share with you about chasing this emotional intimacy. The second is, well, I want to challenge us with this idea that, well, what we've really got to do is, well, we want to become really good at, well, seeking greater emotional understanding. Now, some of us, not just men, but some of us are like emotionally illiterate. You do know that, right? Sometimes you ask a man and you go, what are you feeling? And he goes, I'm mad, I'm frustrated and angry. Well, great. That's all the same thing. What else are you feeling? Mad. Goes out, it's on. But that's not just them. Sometimes you ask a woman, you go, what are you feeling? I feel hurt and angry and hurt and mad, and we are really illiterate at sometimes sharing deep feeling and then helping someone else understand it. So how do you build emotional intimacy in any relationship? Well, I think there are things you do, and the first one is you choose to share experiences. All right. I'm going to use Cheryl and I again as an example. So it's almost 45 years now. Somewhere, this was probably around year 10 or 15, we made a decision that each one of us was going to learn to do something that the other person loved to do, and we would share it with them. And the rules to that, we had this conversation, the rules to it, that whatever you did, you couldn't do it begrudgingly. You had to throw yourself into it wholeheartedly. It had to become a part of you that you could share that together. So your pastor became a bird watcher. We have a life list together. There are more birds on my life list than hers. It didn't become a competition. I've just traveled other places, but I had to learn how to identify birds, see birds, because she loved doing it. We took walks. We did this. We'd pull a car over. Did you see it? We were going on binoculars. We got bird books, things checked off, birding. And the only reason I became a birder was to share it with my wife. Now, that was cool. So what did she do for me? She learned to fly fish. And the rules to that were she had to not just be able to tie a fly. She had to learn how to cast. She stinks overhead, but man, her sidearm cast is beautiful to watch. She had to be able to land a fish and deal with it on her own because I didn't want to have to stop fishing to come deal with her fish. I still remember the first time she landed a trout, and this is exactly what she said. This is cool. And they're going on. And we would have days where my wife and I would share that experience. Now, we don't share everything, but we regularly keep choosing experiences that we will share together because those shared experiences lead to greater emotional intimacy. So whether you're married or you're dating or you're hoping for a relationship, hear this. As you learn to share new experiences that the one loves, you automatically become emotionally more intimate. It's a powerful thing. But it's not just that, because we got this feeling thing we got to deal with. sharing feelings and seeking understanding. How do you do that? How do you do that? So I told you I would give you tools today. Give some examples. I want to give tools. So I give you a tool. We have used this tool in marital counseling with couples. There are people who have this testimony. We did that, and it's only that, and it saved our marriage. This next thing I'm going to share with you. This is a simple tool. If you're ever in a marriage counseling or a premarital counseling session with us, for whatever reason, you're probably going to hear us talk about this. But here's a tool for increasing emotional intimacy in your relationship. Actually, we're going to model it, but it begins this way. Give me 3 feeling words for what you're feeling right now. Just give me 3 feeling words for what you're feeling. And then after you ask that question, you simply ask that. You pick one of them, anyone you want. Pick one and ask the other person, hey, unpack that. Unpack that for me. You don't ask them to defend it. You don't ask why. You're seeking, just unpack that for me. Help me understand that better. It looks like this. Come on up here, hon. So we're going to steal this blue microphone. And it's on. All right. Are you ready, Cheryl? We're going to do this together?
Okay.
Okay. Honey, give me 3 feeling words for what you're feeling. Actually, she's going to do it to me. Go ahead.
Bruce, give me 3 feeling words.
I'm excited. I am nervous. I'm anxious.
Okay. Please unpack anxious.
I'm anxious because there are people that I'm concerned about, that I'm worried about, that I don't know what's happening in their life and on any given Sunday that goes on inside me on any given Sunday. People's faces and names are running through my heart and mind, and I'm always anxious what's happening in their life. That's part of it. Yeah, that's good.
Thank you.
Yeah, she did that. Now, typically we would do this, but I told her I wouldn't do it to her. I told her I wouldn't force her to. Cheryl always struggles with pressure that. How it works best is if the other person then reciprocates. Give me 3 feeling words. Here's how it works really cool. Say Nigel's coming home from work, and he notices his wife is really emotionally different. So later on in the evening, he says something like this. Hey, honey, when I got home, give me 3 feeling words for what you're feeling, because it looked like something was going on. Now, the rule in this is you can't use the same feeling word. You can't say, well, I was angry, mad, and frustrated. Those are all the same one. And if they do, okay, I get you're angry. Give me 2 others. And you said, well, it's disappointed. I was feeling set aside. Whatever feeling it is. It's really cool when then he goes, well, help me understand that set aside thing. And she finds out what happened at work and not him. And he goes, But that happens in relationships also, sometimes in marriage, because we don't seek to understand what the other person is feeling. We feel it's our fault. Anybody ever been there? Everybody been there? You're thinking like, oh man, because we don't understand and we think it's our fault. And so that act, you're just like, hey, what are you feeling? Give me 3 feeling words for what you're feeling. I feel this. I feel this. Unpack that one for me. I get it. All right, so you're feeling, and it promotes understanding. And Peter said what? Honor your wife through understanding. Wow. I do think it's reciprocal. I think Peter wanted to be understood also. I do think it's one of the ways, but it's one of the simple tools that you can use. Just simply get used to it. Why don't you ask, well, why do you feel that way? No preachy things. That's why you don't ask that. When you ask for 3 feeling words, you can't go into 3 sermons. Words, 3 words. I feel this, I feel this, I feel this. Oh. And it works. Try it. You'll instantly find that emotional intimacy thing works. Now, you're single again, you're in a relationship, you're out, it's a cool thing to, you've got a young man or a young girl or a new man or a new woman that you're interested in, you're having that encounter again. You just ask them a question. Wow, give me 3 feeling words for what you're feeling today. And you listen and you ask, unpack one. And it's amazing how much more connected we automatically feel. That tool works for us. All right. We're wired first for emotional intimacy. This is how God created us. This is a part of the relationship building thing that's also about marriage, and it's about everything. We're also wired for physical intimacy. We're wired for physical intimacy in this relationship. And it's significant, and Scripture talks a lot about it, but a lot of times we don't look at it, we don't hear it. But I mean, the writer of Hebrews, we don't know who wrote Hebrews. I mean, he says, this is a powerful statement. He says, look, let marriage be held in honor among all. Let the marriage bed be undefiled, for God will judge the sexually immoral and the adulterous. Wow. Here's this statement that, whoa, there's something special about this marriage physical side of the relationship. There's something special about this gift that so wowed man that he broke into poetry when he saw a woman. And this physical side of the relationship so significant. So I want to talk about the reality, because I do think that all relationships are wired for this. But when we hear physical intimacy, we'll almost always immediately go, oh, he's just talking about sex right now. But we're not. Because there is plenty of non-sexual physical intimacy. And there's a reality that's there. Actually, I can take you to Scripture. Song of Solomon. Song of Solomon. Here's this love affair book that goes back and forth between the man and the woman writing about each other. This is in Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verses 2 through 6. And this is the woman at this time, and she's talking about the relationship she has with a man. And she says this, as an apple tree among the trees of the forest, so is my beloved among the young man. I don't really get the analogy, but okay. With great delight, I sat in his shadow. I was just near him, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. He brought me to the banqueting house. His banner over me is love. He sustains me with raisins, refreshes me with apples. I am sick with love. Wow, what a statement. His left hand is under my head. His right hand embraces me. And when you read the Song of Solomon, this love affair between a man and a woman, it is filled with all sorts of references to their love relationship that had to do with touching and cuddling and hugging and doing all those things that are very non-sexual. So when I tell people this, we were counseling this one couple, premarital counseling, a number of years ago. And he was very frustrated after we'd done the language of love. And he goes, she won't even hold my hand in public. It's his primary language. She wouldn't hold his hand in public because she was embarrassed by it. She came from a family that didn't do any public displays of emotion. I really challenged her, you got to do something. So, she went out to shock him the next time they were out and did something ridiculous, like grabbed him, planted a huge kiss on him in front of other people, and then they got in a fight about it. So I was on her. But there was this desire that he had even before marriage, that there had to be some sense of that physical intimacy that we are wired for. And so non-sexual physical intimacy is significant. It is. It's the reason we do things like hold hands, simple touches like holding the hand that make you feel connected. There are some of you who in church on Sunday morning, I won't point out who, but sit with their arm across the shoulders of their spouse. I won't say who, Larry. If you've ever watched Larry and Barb, it's an every week thing. I don't think you've ever listened to a marriage where he hasn't had you in that physical intimacy brace. It's there. There are others who sit and hold hands. There are others when something's happening in a movie theater, they reach out and they hold hand, they pat on the leg. They do things like that. Why? Because we are wired to connect physically. And so we nurture that. We nurture it in public with things like holding hands, hugs and cuddles, massages, caresses. We do that because we're wired for it. And if you are in the single state, you're in the dating state, this is the physical side of it that you focus on. Because you go too far, then it gets out of balance the other way. Because we are also wired for this sexual intimacy that Scripture talks about. This sexual intimacy. And, Paul, Paul is ministering in Corinth, which is the most sexually loose, immoral country that he goes, city that he goes to minister in. The Corinth church, the church is there, and they struggled because they were doing all sorts of stuff. And they go, Paul, some of us really got this messed up. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? So now Paul, who's never been married, seeks God's face, seeks spirit, seeks understanding, and then he writes this. Now notice how he starts it. Now regarding the questions you asked in your letter, it was such a big deal. They're writing them. Paul, help us. Help us with this. It's out of balance. It's messed up in our society, and it's affecting us, and it's affecting us in church. He writes this. Yeah, it's good to abstain from sexual relations. But because there is so much sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife. Each woman should have her own husband. Then he goes on, he says some powerful stuff. The husband should fulfill the wife's sexual needs. The wife should fulfill her husband's sexual needs. Wow, he said that. Paul. The wife gives authority over her body to her husband. The husband gives authority over his body to his wife. I jokingly say that, hon, you're mine, all of it. I'll say her body, everything that she is. That's what Paul says. Everything is mine, and I am totally hers. That concept. He went on, verse 5. He said, look, so don't deprive each other. Sexual relations, unless you both agree to refrain from sexual intimacy for a limited time so you can give yourselves more completely to prayer. The only time we should be really saying, shutting someone out, that's what he said, for a married couple, for one person to shut the other couple totally out, is because you're on a prayer retreat. I mean, you're just committing yourself to this deep spiritual journey for a short period of time. Even goes in afterwards, he says, when after that's over with, come back together. It goes on, he continues. Paul, in addressing a sexually out of balance society, said, husbands, wives, get this thing right. It is your protection in sexually immoral place. So, how do you keep that physical side of the relationship just doing what it ought to do, how we were wired for it? And I do think that we got to do things like keep romance alive. Because I think romance primes the pump. It's just, there was a period of time where, not because she speaks the language of gifts and not because I do, but I just thought it'd be a cool way to add some romance for a period of time to our life. She was working at an office, and I would regularly have flowers delivered to her desk. Cheap ones. I mean, I was going out buying $40 bouquets, but, I'd stop and buy some $7 bouquet at the grocery store, and I'd take it, and the security guard, you again? Yeah, me. And they would deliver it back to her desk, and her coworkers would go, what do you do this time? How much trouble are you going to do? What do you do? Because their association was, I was trying to romance her to cover up for an egregious mistake. No, I was choosing to romance her to keep it alive in the relationship. Paul understood that keeping that side of our relationship alive was critical. And in our society today, where every man and woman carries around in their pocket a tool powerful enough to open themselves up to any sexual lure or allurement or fantasy or, deprivation they wanted to, form of depravity, it's in their hands. They can do it any time. So we need to keep that side of the relationship right before God. So, hear me, when Paul said that thing about don't deprive one another, here's how I often teach it. I think it needs to be this. In the marriage relationship, sexual intimacy is a priority, not a demand. Not a demand. Both couples see it. When we do premarital counseling, we talk about it that way. Both couples see it. We know it's out of balance. I'm going to tell you a story. You're learning all sorts of stuff about us. A long time ago in our premarital counseling, no matter where the couple was, if they're in church, out of church, where they're at, and wherever they're at, we assumed at some point they had probably crossed sexual lines somewhere. And so I would say this. Look, I'm never going to play detective. I'm not going to go around and look in your windows. But wherever you are in this relationship right now, I want to challenge you to become celibate again. And here's why. And I would tell them, I said, because of how we're wired in the garden, and there's supposed to be this wow reaction. You want this. And I would look at the woman and I would say this, because on your wedding night, you want him to burn for you. And if it's become just second nature and something that you do all the time and it's no longer special, you want it to be special on that night. Let's say to the man, and you want her to want you that night. You want her. We're wired for that. And it is supposed to symbolize everything about that unity. It's wired that way. And so my challenge to all of us in this marriage thing that we are, you've got the writer of Hebrews saying that, look, honor this. Don't let the marriage bed become defiled, for God will hold us accountable. Wow. What a statement. What a statement. 3 types of intimacy: emotional, physical, and then there's spiritual intimacy that's seen in the garden. We've talked a little bit about it already. You want to see it, want to go to it, but I want to talk about spiritual intimacy. It no longer works. My pocket watch that my wife got me when we were married, this was part of the verse it's referenced on the pocket watch. This is once again Solomon who had sought everything else, finally writes books of wisdom. And he says this, 2 are better off than 1. For they can help each other succeed. Then he goes on and says things like they keep each other warm at night, they can defend each other back. He makes all sorts of examples of it. And then he says this, and 3 are even better because that triple braided cord is not easily broken. This idea that not just individually you are seeking a relationship with God, but somehow together you are seeking a relationship with God. Spiritually together, that intimacy is meant to be had. Now, the one thing I remember, the pastor who did our premarital counseling, he did a lot of premarital counseling with us. It lasted 60 minutes. That's it, 60 whole minutes. And we're coming from 2 vastly different backgrounds, and we were ill prepared. That's it, that's our premarital counseling. The only thing he said in there, I remember saying to me, now Bruce, as you grow closer to God, Cheryl, as you grow closer to God, you'll grow closer to each other. And what I learned over 44 years, hear this, not necessarily. There have been times in my life where my journey with the forgiver has been deep, so deep, in some of the deepest, richest moments of it. And we were struggling. She was growing. Because it's not so much about just you growing with God. Before him, you are now what? So somehow, and we are actually lousy at doing this, we've got to figure out, how do we as couples nurture spiritual intimacy? Because we've had times where we were both really deep and it wasn't working. It was a challenge. So what's the key? And what's the tool here on this one? How do we get there? Well, let me give you this. I personally believe that prayer, worship, and scripture are essential practices for cultivating spiritual intimacy in marriage. They help couples connect with God and each other on a deeper level. Hear me what I'm not saying. Man, when we were, so Cheryl grew up in a very small, very conservative church background. I grew up really messed up, pagan, broken. Come to Christ at 20. I grew up in a family, screamed, yelled, and hit each other. She grew up in a family very seldom saw people angry. And we got married. And our premarital counseling, how to survive marriage, was 60 minutes long. We had no idea how to do this. And so we would read books. We'd go and we'd read a book, and the book would add guilt to us. The book would say things like this: well, every single day you need to sit down and read scripture together. There was a grammar truth there. Scripture became important. But this idea that there was this legalistic side to it, that somehow I was failing or we were failing if it wasn't every day at 6 o'clock or every night at 9 o'clock in prayer and what I learned, it wasn't about the program, it was about the three things. It's never been about the checklist. Oh, we did that today. It's been about the pursuit of those three things. Those three things help us to connect as a couple. Prayer, just increasing any of the times that you pray together automatically raises the spiritual intimacy in your relationship. You know where Cheryl and I pray the most together? In the car. If we're coming out tonight, today we didn't because she was in a worship team and I was bringing somebody with me, came in separate cars. But it's very common for us to be coming to church, we're praying together in the car out loud. We're praying together, and it seems like the more often we do that, more significant to that, we'll sometimes get a phone call or this will happen, and there's this, and we'll just be, and I don't know, I'll just be walking before I got the door, I'll turn and I'll just begin to pray out loud. And she just goes, oh, and joins in and she prays. She'll do the same thing. We just increased prayer. We did not make it a legalistic program. Because whenever it was a legalistic program, I failed. When it became just something I was going to chase, I succeeded. We chased more prayer in our relationship. Second, worship. Worshiping together deepens the soul of spiritual intimacy in any relationship, but especially in marriage. And so we began to play more worship in the household, talk more about songs that we sang. I mean, as much, we get to play together, we get to lead worship. One of the early things in our relationship that we fought over the most bitterly was worship, music. Couldn't do it. We had to figure that out because it was all something else at that time. It was never just worship. It was always something else that was involved in it. And so worship then became this thing that was different. We began to talk about songs that were, man, did you hear this song yet? Let me just play it for you. And we'd talk about why that song was significant, would be huge, and we would do this. And those became key things. And the more we chased worship together, the more spiritual intimacy grew on us as a couple. Finally, Scripture. Yes, I had a friend who every single day, he said this, I had a guy that was on staff with me. He said every single day he sat down and he and his wife read Scripture together. We tried that. Man, was I bored. I struggled. And what worked is when we just started talking about Scripture. And she would raise what she was saying. And Cheryl's journey into a book works like this. She will dive into a book for months and months and months, sometimes memorizing it. I'm not wired like that. I read and all of a sudden there's something new that pops out in my eyes. And what we started to do is she shared what was popping to her and I would share what was popping to me. And we would talk about it and it became a part of us. And it became much more like what Deuteronomy said. As you walk, as you eat, as you are living life, let this intimacy be occurring. It was huge. Changed everything. So I submit to you that we have not arrived. But I will share this with you. I will not cease to chase the oneness with my wife. The emotional, physical, spiritual intimacy that I was wired for in the garden, I want as much of it as I can have in this world. I want it. And she's the one I get to chase it with. And together we want more of it, and I am totally committed to that idea that that's what we are called to do. Chase it hard. If you're single again, we're going to talk about singleness next week. The whole message next week's about singleness. But if you're single again, hear me in this. Set a high standard for what you're going to do, because it's not a program you're chasing. It's not a book written by a Christian psychiatrist. You are chasing the oneness you are wired for by God. And that excites me. And that I want. That's the journey we're on. So wherever you are in your journey, I would just want to encourage you to ask yourself the question right now, how are you pursuing it? What are you doing? What are you doing to chase the emotional, the physical, the spiritual intimacy in your relationship with God? It's a simple question. You can't fail it. It's a great one to just ask. But then maybe it'll hit you. You know what? He shared some things there. Well, maybe, and hopefully he took some notes. The note sheet was there. And if not, talk to me later about it or see the message again on YouTube. But maybe there's an idea and it becomes this thing that maybe encourages you in the journey, in the chase for the oneness. That's where we're going to go. And invite the worship team to come back up. I'm going to pray in just a minute. Next week, we're going to dive into it. We're going to dive into, if we're wired like this, what it is, and I call it the battle of the lonely bed, not just because of the physical side of it, it's the battle of being alone. If we're wired for relationship, how do I deal with this? We're going to talk about it next week. We're going to talk about it, and if you're married, you ought to be here because you probably know some people that are in the middle of the battle. And you can talk with them about it also. Would you stand with me?